everyone. I'm Irma Baker. Welcome to our show. We love having you tune in, and we love bringing you interesting people and things that are happening, especially those that are perhaps very interesting to older adults, which is kind of our focus, but whatever age you are, we're glad you're tuning in today. Our guest today is someone that you may have seen him written up in the papers as a soccer star. He's in several halls of fame. Just a wonderful educational opportunity, career opportunities and such. But the thing here is that it's not the way he started. And our program today, actually two programs, Part 1 and Part 2, will introduce you to Fritz Kungl. Fritz is a German immigrant. He is a survivor of World War II, of the concentration camps, and what it was like being a displaced person during World War II and the aftermath of World War II. So this is his story, and we're going to start right now. Fritz, it's so wonderful to have you with us. Thank you.
Nice to be here. Yes, yes.
Well, I was just fascinated by your story and all that you went through, and it is so timely right now to talk about this because of what's going on in Ukraine. It seems that perhaps the world has not learned very much since the 1940s, as we're now in the 2020s. Right. But first of all, what was life like before all the troubles started? Now, you're from Yugoslavia, and I think we need to make a little distinction here. You were born in Yugoslavia, and you grew up in Yugoslavia. That is your homeland. But you are of German heritage. Just like in our country we have Italian Americans, we have Irish Americans, Polish Americans. You were a German Yugoslavian. That created problems.
That's the question my children ask. How come you call yourself a German and you were born in Yugoslavia? And I wish I would have a good answer, but I don't. We immigrated 250 years ago into either Hungary or Yugoslavia, Romania, Czechoslovakia. So you find ethnic Germans in all of these countries. Never changed the language. I mean, even though it was in Croatia, we were always German. I mean, you have German villages in Yugoslavia all over. You know, and they just stayed German. So they said, well, how come, you should be a Yugoslav citizen, but we never considered ourselves a Yugoslav citizen because if you look back, we didn't have any papers. There was no paperwork. Matter of fact, when we left in 1944, our village didn't have any electricity or hot and cold running water. So everything was still, okay, we're German. Ethnic German, and that's what we stayed. So, yeah.
Was your family, were they villagers? Were they farmers? What was your background?
Farming, yeah, it was definitely farmers. Matter of fact, when the whole thing started, supposedly the German people went down the Danube from Germany, settled first in Hungary and then in Yugoslavia, and supposing that they got the 3 different waves, and of course in German it rhymes, like it's Tod, Not, and Brot, meaning that the first time it was death, because they died, most of them because it was so bad, the malaria and all this. The second time, the second wave was want, and the third finally was bread. So they kept on coming, and later on, it actually was known as the breadbasket of Yugoslavia.
Oh.
So, yeah. But all of that changed in 1944, when it was evident that Germany was going to lose the war. Okay, many of the ethnic Germans were forced to leave their homeland. We were not really forced, but we were strongly advised to leave. We could have stayed and fall into the hands of the Russian army, which was approaching, or leave everything behind, just pack up whatever you can carry, and either wind up in Austria or in Germany.
Well, was it a hard, this is a silly question. I'm going to ask you, was it a hard decision to make? Of course it was a hard one. How did it affect your family?
It was very difficult for my mom. My father was in the German army. He was drafted when he was 39 years old. He didn't like it, So my mom was the one that had to make all the decisions. And I still remember, believe it or not, I was at that time 10 years old. I remember the people out on the street, and you looked, many of them were crying. Many of them looked like they're lost, and I was crying. I remember I was crying. I don't know why, probably because most of the people were crying. So I cried. But it was difficult because we had to leave everything behind. We had to leave everything behind. And my mom, I don't know, which was a great decision to leave because, as we find out later on, 2 million of the ethnic Germans that stayed back there wound up in concentration camps and eventually died. They said about 2 million of them.
We hear so much about the concentration camps, but I don't think we have an awareness really of how many there were or where they were. I never thought of Yugoslavia as having concentration camps.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because everybody heard of Dachau, and what else, but which is great, but nobody heard of Guakovo or whatever. And they had a number of concentration camps in Croatia, in Yugoslavia, and even one of the family, a relative, they spent 3 years in a concentration camp, and apparently she said that she was in 13 different concentration camps in Yugoslavia, trying to stay alive. So they moved from one to another just to get away without, and they survived. They're here in Akron.
Well, we have a map of Yugoslavia at the time showing the various concentration camps.
Yes.
There's the map right there. If you can turn a little bit.
Yes.
There is the map of Yugoslavia, and anybody who can look very closely, there are some little crosses that are on the map, and those were the death camps, weren't they?
Right. These were 8 of them that supposedly were the main concentration camps. But like she said, she was in 13 of them, and there were quite a few of the people that said there were even more than 13 concentration camps. But nobody ever heard about it. So I don't, And of course, I did not look into it. I did not research any of that because that was not my intent. My intent was to talk about 4 months that we tried to go back to the country which we shouldn't have. But because of my mom, wanted to go back, so we did that.
Well, when you first left Yugoslavia, when you first left your village, you were, what, 10, 11?
I was 10.
You were 10 years old.
Yes.
And to a 10-year-old boy, the world up to that point had been your future. You had everything that a 10-year-old boy could think he wanted. With the farm and the family and such, and then suddenly your father gets drafted. You're strongly urged to move out of your village and out of Yugoslavia. What was it like being a 10-year-old boy then?
Well, the thing that's hard to understand is, of course, later on, I can understand it now, but at that time I didn't. Even though we were German, ethnic German, we were not wanted in Austria or Germany. They had to take us. We were dropped off. Like, we wound up in Germany with a few other families from our village. And of course, our family was split up. My mom and my brother and I were in one household, my one sister in another one sister in another one. So, yeah. So if you ask one of my sister, my older sister, how was in Germany, she would tell you a story great, because she had wonderful people. My other sister, she was treated like a slave. Now she would have a completely different picture of what Germany was like, or the German people. One of the families that was with the mayor of that village, whenever their mother went to work, they would lock up the two kids in the room. So they have nothing nice to say about the German people. So, but you know, everybody has a different story, because whatever, you know, I mean, if you had, like I said, my oldest sister, she would paint a great picture. My other sister would spit a German in the eye if she could, yeah, because she was treated like a slave, yeah.
Well, what about you? What was your experience? So you're a German heritage family, born and raised in Yugoslavia, transported now back to Germany, where the Germans living in Germany did not want you.
Right, right. So what would I feel? The only thing that I remember is I definitely was homesick when we got to Germany, because I remember waking up and crying. The way it turned out when we left our village in 1944, okay, the people that went with a wagon, they wound up in Austria. We didn't have a wagon. We wound up in Germany because they put us on a train and we wound up in Germany. So 90% of our relatives wound up in Austria. So after about 6 months in Germany, we decided to go back to Austria to be reunited with the rest of the relatives, which worked out great. And yeah. You know, one of the problems is as a 10-year-old, the time is always something. I mean, how long did you stay there, and how long did you stay here, and what time of the year was it? It's the seasons that I go by. Like when we went back to Austria, I remember we stayed at a railroad station, and we had one blanket, and we were talking about whether we should use the blanket to sleep on, or whether we should use it to cover up. So I figured it had to be late spring or early summer, because there was no snow, but it was cold, you know. So that's how I remember things. That's how I remember things.
The things that really strike a young child,
right,
are those things. Well, what were conditions like? You said that you were put on a train. I'm thinking that train was probably not any luxury liner.
No, it was actually cattle cars, you know, with big doors, and yeah, it was not, no, it was not. But at that time, Germany was still under control, at least because I was in, like I said, in 44, in October 44, so the Germans were still the people that actually kind of put us on the train and took us to Germany. But we didn't want to stay in Germany because we weren't treated right. So we thought we'd go back to Austria. When we got to Austria, the Russians were there. The Russian army had already controlled that part of Austria. So when we got there, the Russian people were there, the Russian army. We were not treated badly by the Russian people. Matter of fact, they supplied us with the equipment that made it possible for us to take the trip back to Yugoslavia. And it was in, it was, now it's 1945.
Well, before we get to that, this whole trip from Yugoslavia to Germany and then to Austria and such, what were the conditions like? I mean, did they provide food for you? Did they provide, how were you able to take your belongings with you? What really was your life like?
Whatever we could carry, or whatever, there was not much more than that, because we had to take care of the luggage. And we also put some food together on the train, you know, because we didn't know where we were going to go. But most of the time, just enough what we could carry, that was our belonging. You said, what do I remember? I remember that, and this is kind of unusual, going back to Austria now. And of course, all of the railroad stations, the people would go any direction. All the trains were full of people. Most of them probably didn't know where we're going, like we didn't. We knew we were going back to Austria, but I don't know how my sister found out where we were going to go. We are at that railroad station, and everybody was talking about going to Regensburg. The reason I remember that is because I was awful thirsty at the railroad station. And I said, well, when we get to that city, water is going to be there, because the German word for rain is Regen. So as a 10-year-old, I put the two of them together. Well, I get then there's going to be rain, so I'm going to get water, you know. Well, we got to Regensburg, and that was not what I expected. That was bombed out completely. The only thing that I saw was one wall and a half-dead tree, and that was about it. All the rest of it looked like, if you can think of a puddle with heavy raindrops falling in and bringing up the water. That's what one crater looks like. I mean, it was just, the whole thing was just bombed. I mean, it was flattened out. So there was no water there. I was still thirsty. Yeah.
So how did you survive, and what were your living conditions like when you got to Austria? By the way, I should ask too, how long did it take? This train trip, was it a couple hours, couple days?
No, it would be days. It would be days, because they were usually just, the train would usually go during the nighttime, because they were still afraid of bombings, you know, because the Allied forces still bombed Germany at that time. So the train would not go during the day, it would go to the night. So it usually, at least in my memory, it took a few days to get from one place to another. And of course, if you ask me how many days, I couldn't tell you, because I don't, you're talking to a guy that tried to remember when he was 10 years old, and then of course 11. So my memory of the details are very limited, to say the least.
Some of those things stick with you your whole life.
Yes, and you know, you would think that it might get easier to talk about it, but it's just the opposite. Just the opposite. It gets harder every time you talk about it. Yeah, because it brings back memories that probably, it's kind of difficult. I mean, difficult to imagine. I mean, everything looked like, I mean, looking back right now, it seems like a bad nightmare. Everything kind of in dark. I mean, nothing seemed like it was bright. Everything was dark. Everything just, yeah. But anyway, we did get to Austria. The Russians were there. We wound up on a huge farm in Austria, and we did work there. As well, my dad did. I didn't. Yeah.
Had you been reunited with your dad by that time?
My dad was with us. Yeah, not at first, but later on, my dad came into the picture after we came back the second time. But this is another, yeah, because we came back to the same farm again. So I'm going ahead of them. But anyway, the Russians were there. Okay, now we are there. The Russians said, "Okay, you don't belong here. Why don't you go back home?" Because we couldn't go.
Well, at this time, it just seems like your family must have been struggling so much just for the daily necessities. How did this affect your mom? How did she ever manage to keep the family together?
At this time in Austria, it wasn't too bad. We did have enough food. We were not hungry, and we did have a place to stay. We actually stayed in a house with bed bugs and all that, but it was still a house. They had to fumigate it a few times in order to get rid of it, because during that time, it didn't make any difference where you were, where you went. You always had head lice and body lice. They were always with you. So, but anyway, Yeah, but that wasn't bad. It wasn't bad until we decided to go back. And yeah, and that happened after the war was over. So in May of beginning of May 1945, the war was over. At least that's what they said, because we didn't know. But the war was over, and of course my mom was determined to go back.
Sometimes it's hard to imagine what it's going to be like. I'm sure your mother had a picture in her mind, just as all of you did. But during your time in Austria, you said you were able to work while you were there?
Yes, they worked. I mean, they did, because it was a huge farm, like a collective farm, and we didn't get paid. They just worked for food, and of course for the to stay alive. Yeah, so that was all we wanted. I mean, we didn't have any money. We didn't get any money. But I was, like I said, here again as a child. You never think about these things. I mean, I never really could. I never could understand or even think about what my mom had to feel like it, because I know that she was very much disappointed of not being able to help her family more than she could. And that's why she was driven to go back, because we were not wanted in Germany, we were not wanted in Austria. So I think she figured that there had to be something better for her family than staying at a place where you're not wanted. And I think that must have been her drive to go back home to Yugoslavia.
What about your sisters? How were they managing through this time of shuttling back and forth between countries?
My sister, my poor 16-year-old sister, she actually had to take charge, because my mom was always kind of sick. My oldest sister was not quite healthy. So my oldest sister at that time was 20. My next sister was, like I said, 16, and then my other sister 14, and then I, and then my brother. I never thought about it, and up to that point, you talk about hygiene, okay? And it gets worse as time goes on. Never thought about what my female, we had four women in the family. My younger sister at that time, 14, and then, like I said, yeah, how did they keep clean? What did they do? But as a child, but now that I think about it, that we always talk about, you have to take a shower every day and you have to do this. What did they do? I never had a chance to ask them. But after I got older, because I don't remember ever taking a shower that I know of.
Just the basic, like you just mentioned, what we think of as the normal daily routine of bathing, of wearing clean clothes, of opening a refrigerator and getting out food, or a cabinet, cooking something on a stove. From the time you left your original village, whether you were going to Germany or to Austria and then back, as we'll talk in the next segment about going back to Yugoslavia and what happened there, none of those things were really available to you, were they?
No. But at the same time, our village was still so far backwards. Like I said, we had no electricity, we had no newspaper, we had no hot and cold running water, we had none. So going into Austria and Germany, they did have all that. I mean, they had, so it actually was not that much of a difficult transition, because we accepted it. I mean, it was not any worse than what we had at home. So all we wanted was just food, and we got that. I gotta tell you this though, talking about that, and this is in Germany now. We're over there, and I liked milk. Okay, I like to drink milk, and they had all kinds of the milk cans were standing there, and I said, "Gee, I would like to have milk, drink milk." It was skimmed milk, but I said, "That's all right. I take whatever it is." So she said, "Yeah, you can have it." Well, I was allowed to have milk for 2 or 3 days, and after that she says, "That's it." Why she said I can't have any more milk, I don't know. But she just cut me off and said, "No more milk for you."
No more milk
no
for
more milk.
you.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a little break now and come back with part 2 of our program of learning about your journey to freedom. And we hope you'll all tune in for part 2. Check your WCTV programming schedule for when part 2 will be on, and we'll be right back.